You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
All right, we are back once again for another edition of Sirius Sports, and I'm with my guy, ALDawg. What's happening, Al?
Nothing much, man. How was your eclipse experience?
It was eerie, dude. It felt like an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Yeah.
It really did. So, I was in the heart of the eclipse, and I was not sure what I wanted my relationship to be like with the eclipse. I wasn't sure I wanted to be out with a bunch of people. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be outside. I wasn't even sure I wanted to look at the eclipse. So I decided kind of at the last minute to go into my backyard and put out a little chair, and I was up against the back wall of my house, and then I have these trees in my backyard, and they're all bloomed with leaves, not flowers. And it was light, right? So I'm out there before the eclipse happens, and I decided I just wanted to record sound before the eclipse. So I was just recording the sound, and then as it moved into totality, I got my cell phone out and I started recording the trees. And the sun was just right above my house. So, and it was cloudy here, and it came out for a little bit during the totality phase. But what I recorded was the changing of the light with the trees, and it's just fucking eerie. Yeah. Like how dark it got, and you just like the trees go, you could see like the light between the leaves and the branches, and all of a sudden, everything just almost goes completely pitch black, with the exception of a few sort of like rivulets of light between everything. And then they're kind of swaying slightly in the wind, even though the wind had really stilled. It was eerie. I mean, it was eerie how dark it got.
Yep.
What was it like there with you?
Oh man, it was really interesting because, so I'm at work. We're working at this house, and the guy we're working for, he works from home, but he's all into it. He's got the glasses ready. He's got that cardboard box thing ready. He's got some reflection thing doing. So he's ready. He's geared up. So at first he's like, hey, do you guys want to check this out? I'm like, nah, not really. Cause I was trying to avoid it. I was like, I kind of, cause I've heard contradictory reports about eclipses, whether they're good, whether they're bad, what do they mean? So I was like, I'll avoid it. But it got to the point where it's like, all right, it got eerie when it started to happen. And I look at it, and without any glasses or protection, I'm like, I don't really like the vibe. That's a weird light. I'm going to go back to work. And then eventually he's like, hey, do you want to check it out? This is getting good. I'm like, all right, I can't resist. He's got glasses. So I looked at it through the glasses, and it was fucking cool. It was so fucking cool to do it through the glasses. I don't have to worry about my eyes. And I was mind blown, dude. I was like, this is way cooler than I thought it was going to be. But it was weird because the light was eerie, right? The light was eerie. At one point, dude, all the dogs in this neighborhood are barking. All of them.
Yeah.
That was fucking weird. And it was also weird because I couldn't resist. I got curious, but two of my coworkers were just like, couldn't have been less interested. There was no, they just like had no inclination for the slight chance of it being mystical in any way, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I looked at it because I had a fucking awesome experience. And I feel like people talk about the sun being sort of a tunnel.
Yeah.
Dude. Yeah. We're in a different place than we were prior to the eclipse.
Yeah. You're not the only person that said that. And I think that's it's a commonly held, not commonly, but I think that there are a number of people that feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, I feel really good about it. I loved my eclipse experience. I was like surprised how good it was. And I didn't really plan for it or anything. And the guy just happened to have, if that guy didn't have glasses, I would have just been like, whoa, weird. And that would have been it. So.
Right. So we had the eclipse here in October, which was annular. We had the glasses, and I looked at the thing, and man, I saw some shit in the sun. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It was really crazy. And I also saw what looked like two suns, which was really weird. And I'm like, where's that coming from? Right. So I had all these weird optical things going on the last time. And it was Longo was here. Right. And so he was part of that whole thing. And we had completely clear blue sky, unobscured by clouds. Right. Yesterday, there was a lot of cloud cover here. And so we didn't have the full, but there was a moment where it came out and I could see it in totality, and I didn't have any glasses. And for a period of time, in totality, you don't need glasses, apparently, right? Mm-hmm. There's a very brief period of time where you don't need them. So I think I caught it right at that point in time. But it was just, the dogs were barking here as well. That was the other thing. I noticed that the dogs were barking here. And, it's a once in a lifetime moment. Right? Like we're not going to have another eclipse like that till 2045. So, man, and I don't know if you caught this, but apparently they diffused 3 bomb situations today in New York. Did you catch that?
I did not know.
So there were at least 3 explosive device situations that they diffused in New York. One was a hand grenade, maybe 2 were hand grenades. Mm-hmm. And then another was, I don't know what it was, right? But it's like, wow, that's really interesting. So I'm really interested in what happens after the eclipse. That to me is really the story that gets told. We all have our experience of the eclipse itself, but the other thing, I don't know if you saw this, and we'll get onto the sports track here in a minute, but there was this interview with this FBI guy that came out and basically talked about how Alex Jones has been set up. Did you see that?
I did not, but that sounds way more interesting than sports, to be honest. Like, look, what's going on with this?
So, okay, now it wasn't O'Keefe, but it was an O'Keefe-like operation.
Yep.
And they had targeted this guy who was either a contractor for the FBI or he was an FBI guy. Mm-hmm. And he talked, and it's the same situation, same scene, over dinner. And I swear to God, these guys that they talk to, they all sound gay. Right? Like, why are you going out and having, and it's almost always the same, like, location, like burgers and beers.
Yes.
Right. Let's go have some burgers and beers. And he's with, obviously, you don't see the guy, but he sounds like a younger dude. Mm-hmm. And it's like, he thinks he can, like, make it with this younger guy. Mm-hmm. So he's starting to spill the beans on what they did with Alex Jones. And essentially they targeted him. Mm-hmm. Right. And the FBI, according to this guy, encouraged the families of Sandy Hook to sue him. Right? They said, well, we can't do anything because he didn't break any laws. However, you probably have a civil case. So they with the guidance supposedly of this guy and the FBI went through the legal loopholes to go get Alex Jones. And basically he said, we wanted to bankrupt him. Right. And he said that we went through InfoWars and all the people that listen to him. And they've got a fucking dossier on everybody. Mm-hmm. Right. This is basically what the guy says. So this is all coming out on the backside of this eclipse as well. And I just feel like that this is where the stories are going to be over the course of the next year and a half. because we didn't see the full effect of the 2017 eclipse really until we got into 2019 and 2020, where we were literally a country divided. And that's really what the function of that eclipse was. When you look at it from Oregon to Florida, it cut the country right in two. So by the time we got into the summer of 2020 and the summer of Floyd, we were a house divided, right? And we were a nation kind of at war with ourselves.
So the core of the backside of the clip news is going to be revelation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is where things get interesting now. It's on the backside.
Yeah. I've always been really suspect of those James O'Keefe project style Veritas, secret hidden camera, but it's the same setup every single time. And the guy just talks basically right at the camera, just spills his guts. It's the same formula after one or two beers, just tells everybody everything. And it's just like, I am sort of suspect of those videos, because often what happens after those videos come out, nothing happens. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it'll be somebody from like Pfizer spilling their guts, or somebody from this voting something or other. And then it's released and then nothing results from it. You know what I mean? And so I've learned to really become disinterested in some of that style of journalism, because it should be breaking. It should be very revelatory, but nothing ever comes from that stuff. It's weird.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like you need to complete the circuit, right? And the circuit would be a deeper investigation, and then having a grand jury. Like, you have to have a grand jury.
Yeah.
If you don't have a grand jury, you're kind of fucked. Well, why do you need a grand jury? You need a grand jury because if you don't go and testify, then you are fined. What is it? There's a term for it. It's skipping my brain.
Liable?
No, you're not liable, but you go to jail.
Okay.
You go to jail for not testifying, which is what happened to Peter. What's his name? Who's in jail now because he decided no. But you need a grand jury, and so unless you have a grand jury, it goes nowhere. Right? That's the bottom line. So you have to complete the circuit. You could have all the revelation in the world, but there has to be. I mean, I suppose if you wanted to, if it was a corporation or company, you could boycott the product, right? And that would be completing the circuit. But other than that, there's, it's you need to have some kind of adjudication. Contempt of court is what I was looking for. If you don't show up, you're in contempt of court.
Okay. So I want to ask you something real quick. You mentioned 3 bombs being diffused in New York, but that actually immediately reminded me of the eclipse, because during the eclipse, weren't there 3 planets in alignment, if I'm not mistaken? Or like it was something significant with 3 planets with this specific.
Yeah, well, there were, I believe, 5 planets on the visible side of the sun.
Okay.
Right. I think there were 5. But the key planets were all Aries, right? And Aries is explosive, and Aries is warlike, and So, and then the retrograde is also interesting too, because the bombs didn't go off or the grenades didn't go off. So it's fascinating to see what's going to happen in the aftermath of all this thing.
I feel great about it, man, because I feel like a lot of tricks that have been used in the past aren't going to work anymore. And that's the general consensus I get from sort of the online culture as well as real life. You know what I mean? I just feel like prior to the eclipse, things were starting to become, things were becoming, the tricks that have been used on the general public the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years aren't going to have that same effect post-eclipse. That's how I feel generally.
I think we're headed in that direction, and I think maybe this has amplified it, and sort of hit it with like warp speed. So yeah. I mean, one of the things that I keep coming back to is this whole like blood libel, hate speech thing that's coming out of like the Daily Wire, and this whole group of I call them the modern Sanhedrin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they just recently, I don't know if it was in Europe, I forget which country, but they just recently banned The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, which is one of Shakespeare's, great plays, and has to do with this guy Shylock, who's a moneylender, and
Mm-hmm.
and apparently the people who are the descendants of Shylock are offended by Shylock, even though that was his role during that time. But it was not an unfair historical portrait of somebody who lent money, right? And he wanted a pound of flesh. And the pound of flesh he was talking about was the guy's dick and balls, right? That's what the pound of flesh represented. So this thing is going so far now that they want to ban The Merchant of Venice from being.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That's truly insane. But like, I think insanity, if you're completely insane, like Ben Shapiro, for example, is visibly insane. Okay. He's not a composed person. He's a manic little guy who's like this, kind of almost cartoonish, boyish sort of weirdo, right? And I think somebody like that is going to go literally insane within the next 4 years. I mean, he ducked a debate from Candace Owens. As of right now, he completely ducked that debate.
Yeah.
Like just
well,
hit it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right about Shapiro. I think I think if you know anything about his history, like Ben Shapiro was a prodigy.
Mm-hmm.
So he wound up graduating from high school, like I think it was 15. So he started to go to college when he was 16 years old. And then he, studied law, and he became, I think, a lawyer, passed his bar at some like insanely young age, like 21 or 22 or something like that. So you're dealing with somebody who's a child prodigy. And I think that there's a personality type for child prodigies. And I think they're really imbalanced in a lot of ways. They don't develop along a certain line. He's a Capricorn, so he grew up fast. So they don't really know how to play, have fun, right? Interact with their peers. They're pushed ahead. They're almost like hyper stimulated in terms of their development. So there's a real imbalance with who they are. And I also think that, there was probably a high degree of I wouldn't say favoritism, but if you're the parent of a child prodigy, right, you're running around and you're thinking your kid is really special, and you're bragging on your kid all the time, right? And the kid knows on some level that he's special because it's being reflected back to him as an environment. And then not only that, but he's proving his specialness in an area where he's competing with people that are 4 or 5 years older than him. That's got to create a distorted psyche in and of itself, right? And at some point, right, somebody who has had everything go their way in their life, at some point when those things stop going their way, I think that's where the breakdown happens. And I think that's what you're tapping into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That when the world just doesn't roll over for Ben Shapiro the way it has most of his life, I think you'll see those personality defects really pop up.
Me too. And I think we're starting to see that. We're starting to see him sweat and get manic and get uncomfortable. And I think we're going to see, I'm predicting right now, I think we're going to see a mental breakdown from Ben Shapiro, a Jordan Peterson style mental breakdown within the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable prediction, because there's no way that he can. First of all, there's no way that he can find a middle ground.
Right.
There's no way he can find the middle ground. There's no way he can compromise. So he has to double down, triple down, quadruple down on his position, no matter what. Right? He's entrenched.
Yes.
And the further you become entrenched in your position, you have to take more and more drastic measures to defend your position. And then you're just going to lose the plot.
Yeah. And I think with Candace, you know, for me personally, Candace isn't going to be my champion. Like, oh, check out Candace. She's owning the left, or she's owning the neocons, or whatever the case may be. She's not going to be my champion. But I would say this: she doesn't have to do a thing from this point forward in regards to her beef with Ben Shapiro. If she doesn't do nothing, she already won.
Yes.
Because you know what I mean? And I think that's a great position to be in.
Yeah. I think the bigger piece around all this is, will the Daily Wire be looked at as kind of more of gatekeeper central versus a viable alternative news channel? Because I think there's going to be links. There are people that have already made the links between Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire and the Mossad in Israel, right? And so are they going to lose their credibility? I mean, should they just register as a foreign agent in this country? I mean, that's really what I think is going to be their downfall. That's my sense.
My hope is that somebody like Matt Walsh, for example, what he does is he goes after the most low-hanging fruit he can possibly find. What is a woman? Like the dumbest stuff. But what's unfortunate is a lot of people are willing to root on this guy sometimes who just partakes in the most low-hanging fruit imaginable. You know, whether it be debating a college student or doing a documentary like that. It's just if people want to be impressed by these really simple and stupid tricks, I think they'll be in business. But if a large enough group of people decides that they don't want to go along with a foreign agenda, then I think that will be, you know, to their detriment.
I think of all the people there, and I've seen this just over the last week, Matt Walsh has actually staked out a position that is much closer to a position that you and I would take than anybody else at the Daily Wire. And it does have to do with free speech. And I was actually surprised when he actually did a pod, or he did something where it was like, oh, he's saying something that isn't like the approved Daily Wire message. And I don't know if they allowed him to do that, or it's like, Matt, you go out and you go say this so we can, you know, relieve a little bit of the pressure here. But he was not in lockstep with Ben and sort of Jeremy Boring and what the Daily Wire had been pushing with this whole Candace thing. So I thought at the very least, Walsh had some balls to say something different, unless of course it was part of the messaging. Like, man, you go out here and say this, right? And you know, it's hard to know with these people, but he strikes me as a guy that I wouldn't call him authentic, but I think if Matt Walsh had to bend too far, he wouldn't be able to be whatever version of Matt Walsh he is, right? Like, I don't think he could bend too far. I don't get that with that guy, because I think there are some values that he has.
I don't know. I'm 2 thumbs down on Matt Walsh personally. I think he's more like a pet or a programmable actor. You know what I mean? I've never been impressed with that guy.
Well, I haven't either. But of all the people there, I think that he's probably the one guy that would break rank, or he's the one guy that they would say, okay, you go deliver this message. And maybe that's just all who he is. Maybe he is just a programmable bot like you're referring to. But I would say that I'm leaning towards him being sort of just this errand boy. But if he wanted to break out and do his own thing,
I think he should do it in spectacular fashion because credit to Candace, she made an exit. She made a hell of an exit. You know?
Oh,
what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And I think Matt Walsh could be one of those guys that if he wanted to do something on his own, he probably could.
He could, because he has the brand equity. He honestly does.
I don't think Michael Knowles, on the other hand, could not do it.
No.
Right. Or Andrew Clavin could not. I mean, they need the Daily Wire more than the Daily Wire needs them.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, all right, we've talked about the sport of politic. You want to talk about the sport of sport?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could talk about a child prodigy, kind of like Ben Shapiro, is Mr. Bronny James, but he's not panning out as planned, it seems. Right?
Yeah, I forgot to put Bronny James in the thumbnail, but let's talk about Bronny James. Go ahead.
I would say, okay, so I've been loosely paying attention to Bronny James for a while. It's difficult to ignore because he is, the scion. Is that the right word, or the
scion is a good word, man.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes these words come to me like just randomly, but he is the scion of the LeBron James dynasty, right? And so he's been hyped up since he's been in 8th grade. Fast forward to this past year, he's on the USC basketball team, averaging less than 5 points, doesn't start. He's transferring. He's headed to the transfer portal. His NBA potential isn't looking that great at this point. And, as you mentioned, he's looking to transfer to a school potentially like Pepperdine, where he can start and he can play and he can develop, because he's not going to have this easy road to the NBA like everybody thought, like his dad thought. His dad wanted him to get drafted out of high school. Like, it's nuts. So
he is entering the transfer portal and declaring for the NBA draft at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And so let's we'll do a little screen share here. First of all, I think if I were LeBron James, I would have told him to play baseball or football. It's like, dude, play sports, go out play basketball, that's fine.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
he's 6'4". Only 6'4".
He's only 6'4". He doesn't have elite athleticism. He's never been the best player on his team. When he was at Sierra Canyon, he was not the best player at Sierra Canyon. Maybe on an AAU team or two, right, where they hand selected the players so that he'd be the best player. Maybe on an AAU team, he was not the best player at USC. He didn't even start for USC. He came off the bench. He had a very disappointing season. I think he averaged 6 points a game. So he's never been really the best guy on his high school team or his college team. And now he's going to enter the NBA draft and also hit the transfer portal. So the idea is that they'll get feedback from people that are in the league, right? Like GMs that are in the league. And they'll say, yeah, we could take Bronny somewhere in the middle second round. Would that be enough for him to stay in the draft or do the transfer portal and go to a school like Pepperdine or Loyola or San Diego State, which would be a good school for him to play at if he was going to go do the transfer portal thing. But so the rumor is that he would probably, if he went pro, he would go somewhere between, like, say, somewhere in the mid 30s, like around between 38 to about 47, somewhere there in the second round. Like, that's where he would wind up. And the team that would take him would be ostensibly taking him so that they could get LeBron. That's the whole deal. Yeah. Because he wants to play with this kid. And
So,
the team that's kind of in that sweet spot, I think their pick is around 37 or 38, are the Philadelphia 76ers. And that would, if they took Bronny, that would set LeBron up to play with Joel Embiid. And, that could be, like his swan song, right? To go out, as a champion. I don't know if the Lakers would pick him somewhere in the second round,
yeah.
possibly. But he's not going to be a first round. I mean, I would be really surprised if he was a first round pick. The only way he would be a first round pick is if some team squarely wanted LeBron and just said, screw it. Maybe somewhere down towards the bottom of the draft.
Okay.
Some team might take a chance on him and say, okay, we're loaded.
Okay.
We'll take him.
Okay, so if he is drafted, it's almost purely from nepotism, right?
It's total nepotism.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, he almost reminds me of Zaire Wade, who, Dwayne Wade tried the same thing, tried to get his kid in the league. Did not work out. Zaire did not have the talent. But one really bizarre thing you said was Philadelphia 76ers, Kobe Bryant's hometown. If LeBron James
Right.
and his son, if LeBron finished his career in Kobe's hometown, that's what I think you would call high strange.
Yeah, I mean, it would almost be like the final dismantling of the Kobe legend in a lot of ways, right? It would be almost supernatural. It would be weird.
That would be really weird. But this is my prediction. I just think that people can say what they want about the NBA, but it's extremely, extremely competitive. These guys aren't just athletes. A lot of them are freaks. They're athletic freaks.
Right.
And when you have a situation where a kid goes from USC where he's averaging 5 to 6 points a game, he's going to stick out like a sore thumb, or he's not going to see the court at all. And I think that him entering the NBA, especially in the first round, would hurt the integrity of the league so much, because right now he just does not have the talent, and he needs to make a lot of very big leaps in order to not stick out as somebody who doesn't belong. Because right now he doesn't belong in the NBA. I'm not saying that he sucks. I'm not saying he's a bad kid. I think he's a lower Division I player, which is saying a lot. Being a Division I college football player, basketball player, you're really, really talented and really good overall, but not quite NBA. NBA it's a league of freaks for the most part. You know what
Yeah,
I
I
mean?
mean, you stick him on a Long Beach State or Pepperdine, you
Yeah.
can start for, and maybe he averages somewhere between 10 to 14 points a game.
Right.
And is that enough to get you drafted and have a pro career? I mean, I feel like I actually feel bad for the kid. And I know he's set for life, and he probably drives around in a Bugatti or whatever. I mean, but I feel bad for him because he's been put into this position where his dad is not only a great player, but he's like a fucking helicopter dad.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Jordan had 2 kids play college basketball, and he was not a helicopter dad. He never said, I want to play with my kids. It was like, and they transferred around a little bit. And it was like, whatever, right? And they had to live up to being Michael Jordan. Walter Payton's kid, played at Miami, played a couple seasons for the Tennessee Titans. Dad's the greatest running back of all time. But I never got a sense when Walter was alive that he was this helicopter dad. LeBron is the worst helicopter dad I've ever seen in sports.
Wow. That's saying a lot.
So not only do you have to live up to this legend, but you've got the legend like kind of lurking over you the whole time, and playing the role of your like your basketball Svengali. I feel sorry for the kid, and you should just let him do his thing, whatever it is. And not try to orchestrate, this fantasy that he's going to be the only player in NBA history to play with his son, and then somehow magically win a world title
Yeah.
with his kid. And then what happens when LeBron goes? He's not going to play forever.
Mhm.
Like, what's going to happen to his kid? He's going to stick around and ride the pine, and that's that. I mean, I don't think any of this is really good. You know, in a weird way, this is kind of the opposite of Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro was so bright that he was a prodigy in school and got accelerated. Bronny James was not a prodigy, right? A good player and the son of a named basketball player, but not a freak, right? He is not a freak athlete.
Right.
And so I feel sorry for the kid, and I don't see how any of this ends up well. Do you?
I mean, I see him living a quiet life, you know. But the thing about basketball is the NBA is not the only opportunity. I could see him playing in Europe for a few years. You know what I mean? Something like that. I think if he were to average 14 points at Pepperdine, San Diego State, someplace like that, that can set you up nicely to potentially live a good basketball life in Europe, one of their various leagues. But I just don't see him having any NBA career at this point. Yeah.
I think if he was going to go into an international league, I would send him to China. That's where I would send him.
That would make sense. He would get paid
And,
there. He would get a lot of money.
He'd make a shit ton of money there.
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, he would probably do pretty well. You know, if you follow those European, those players that go to Europe and their contracts, those guys are basketball gypsies. They don't play with those teams more than 2 years. I've followed a lot of those players. I mean, it's like they are all over the place. You know, they're bouncing from Tel Aviv to Athens to Barcelona. I mean, wherever, man. They're just all over the place. And I just don't see a James kid doing that.
Right.
I don't think it's in the future. Now,
10-year contract in China makes total sense. Complete sense.
Yeah, right. He would be a star there. Now, the younger brother, Bryce, apparently has more natural athletic ability. Plus, he's taller.
Mm-hmm.
But they've invested everything into Bronny. So, you know, Bryce has gotten the scraps. And Bryce is actually built more like LeBron. And he's still growing. So Bryce will probably top out around 6'7", 6'8". But he's not. He's kind of late to basketball as well. So he's going to, I don't know. Maybe he's the guy that has the natural talent, has the Dennis Rodman growth spurt, and you never know. Now all of a sudden, LeBron's got to adjust his sails and say, "Shit, this is the kid I should be playing with." And if that's the case, then how does Bronny feel then? It's like he's going to feel even worse, right? The whole thing just, to me, it's just, I think it's just bad parenting. I understand where he's coming from. It's bad parenting.
Interesting. Very interesting indeed. So we got dude, you know what's crazy? The what's called the Dodgers guy. I'm not going to pronounce his name correctly. I know his name in my head, but Ohtani, right?
Yeah.
That's becoming sort of a big deal. I was hearing about that today. You know what I mean? The whole gambling controversy and the fact that, you know, that translator probably didn't come up with 4 million on his own. I mean, that's what is your quick prediction on that? Because that doesn't seem to be going away. That whole situation.
I think it just depends on like what narrative starts to dominate baseball. And right now, we were going to talk about this later in the show, but the narrative that's dominating baseball is that all these pitchers getting hurt. And I don't follow baseball like I used to. So I just started to read about all these guys suffering pretty severe arm injuries. And it's not like one or two, you know, we're talking like 7, 8, 9. These are all, you know, starting pitchers. And they've never seen anything like this before at the pro level. So I think that that, and that's not a story that baseball wants to be a dominant narrative, right? Right. They want baseball is a sport desperately in search of stars. So they don't want people who could potentially be star players wind up out for 8 or 9 months or getting a Tommy John or whatever. So it just depends on there's this guy, Ellie De La Cruz, who plays for the Cincinnati Reds, who's a freak. I think he hit 2 home runs from both sides of the plate last night. Like, that's a player that Major League Baseball wants to invest in because he's just got such a freak athletic profile. It just depends on the narrative. If the narratives don't pan out or break down, then the noise of the Ohtani thing will get louder. But nobody at MLB is going to do anything. Nobody in the Dodgers are going to do anything. There's nobody in the press pool. Like, you would literally need to have a bulldog journalist who would just follow this stuff, right, and get as much dirt and records and everything that they could. And that could happen, right? There are people who write books, and there were these 2 guys that wrote a book about Bonds and the whole steroid era when it was happening. And that book became really popular and a bestseller. So I would think it would be somebody who would be dedicated to looking at the Ohtani thing. Because really, I'll ask you this question, and you tell me what you think. Do you think because nobody really reads anymore. Like, nobody buys Sports Illustrated. I don't even think Sports Illustrated is in business anymore. Do you think any of these online portals like ESPN or Fox or CBS Sports want to do an in-depth investigation on the LA Dodgers and Ohtani?
No, I don't. And when you asked that question, I came to a huge realization that it's not necessarily an AI takeover we're experiencing. It's that humans within these organizations are experiencing their own lack of humanity because they're not going to put in the blood, sweat, tears to do a write-up, because they're just going to churn out bullshit as if they're AI themselves.
Yeah, it feels like people are a byproduct of massive machine learning.
Yeah.
Right. This is what's going on, and it goes back to this thing with Michael Knowles and how he kind of sold out Candace Owens. He had no values. He didn't stand up for the Godfather. He's the Godfather of her daughter.
That's
her
crazy.
husband is his best friend.
Yeah, I didn't know they were close like that. That's such a crazy stat.
He's Judas, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's Judas. He's selling her out for 40 pieces of silver. But
Wow.
it's not uncommon for that to happen in the mainstream or alternative mainstream media. I mean, look at these guys like Charles Barkley. I mean, there was a time when Charles Barkley was supposedly this, raw, honest, truthful guy. And, now he's a fucking cuck. He's bought and sold and paid for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chuck used to be really funny, but I haven't heard anything funny in a while.
No, he's got a show with Gail King.
Yikes.
She's his handler.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I just don't see the major outlets having any appetite for an Ohtani scandal and a Major League Baseball scandal. The only people that would have an appetite for it would be like the social Marxists that want to destroy the sport. And then of course it would be a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one really substantial thought because somebody left a great comment after last show where they said that baseball is one of the best sports for gamblers, because they can do prop bets. And I thought to myself, if Ohtani was in on prop bets, or if a larger organization that was running sports books, let's say in Japan, let's say in California, knew that Ohtani would not hit a home run in an even inning. Okay, so no home runs in the second inning, no home runs in the fourth inning, eighth inning. Having an inside guy that's in on it potentially, right? The amount of leverage that you could parlay from there, because you could just advertise insane prop bets, parlays, whatever the case may be, knowing that he's not going to hit a home run in an even inning. So I just think like what's pro sports, the gambling's going to fuck up pro sports to such a degree that we're just starting to see it because, especially with, we've talked about college football, but like there's going to be more incentive. Somebody like Ohtani, who was at a $700 million contract, there's going to be so much incentive to play ball with sports books that it's actually going to potentially overpower these monstrous salaries.
Yeah. I mean, I think a prop bet would be something like 2 hits or over.
Right. But it's like prop. It's like,
it only has to have one hit, right? One hit, and that's it. Right? He could walk, he could strike out. Yeah, baseball is one of those sports. I mean, the other thing, and I've seen this for a long time with baseball, is the home plate umpire. And I've seen the home plate umpire squeeze strike zones and then elongate strike zones on other pitchers and control the outcome of games. Mm-hmm. I've seen it on many occasions. And if you really wanted to cut to the heart of gambling influence in baseball, it's the home plate umpire. And I can't tell you how many, and again, in big games, playoffs, World Series, just crazy fucking abnormalities in strike zones. Not even funny. And you just sit there and go, what the hell's going on here? Mm-hmm. Right? So this does not smell right. So yeah, it's one of those games where the main person in the game can control just about everything, and that's the home plate umpire.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or a star player. I mean,
well, a star player can, but a home plate umpire can squeeze the strike zone on a star player. Mm-hmm. There's a story when the Oakland A's were playing the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. And this was the 1991 World Series. And the A's were heavily favored, right? So big odds, right, on the A's. So if you wanted to have a good underdog bet, you went with the Cincinnati Reds, right? And so there was a lot of bookie money and Vegas money on the A's. And Rickey Henderson, who had an amazing understanding of the strike zone, he's the first batter up, and I think he's facing Jose Rijo. And he got called out on a third strike that was about 1.5 feet outside the strike zone. And he's the leadoff batter in the first inning of the first game of that World Series. And he walked back to the dugout and he shook his head. And the inference was that the A's knew that they were in for a very difficult time at the plate with the umps in that series. And it wound up that the Cincinnati Reds swept the A's, who were heavily favored. So again, right, who controlled the strike zone of those games? It was the umpire. And I remember it was who was talking about it? It was Canseco. Canseco was talking about that game, and he talked about Rickey, and he said we just knew that we were not going to be able to hang in there against the ump during the series. That's exactly what happened.
So, what else we got on the menu? Caitlyn Clark, freaking Cooper Flagg. What else is going on here in the world of sports?
Let's talk about Caitlyn Clark.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
what do you, before we get into it a little bit here with sort of the description, Have you seen her play, and what are your thoughts on her?
So I've seen her highlights. I haven't watched a full game, but I'll YouTube her, and I think she's fundamentally changed the game. I think she's a great player. She's awesome, and I've never seen a woman play basketball at that level. So I'm impressed with her. I haven't heard anything I dislike. I overall have a favorable opinion of her. I hope she basically retires after college. I think that the WNBA is it's just an abomination essentially, and I think that college basketball for women is great. So I hope that she somehow has the self-awareness to realize that college basketball will be the apex of her career, as it is for all women college basketball players. People like Sue Bird, Diana Taurasi come to mind because once they go pro, I'm never going to hear or pay attention to you again. And I think I represent a lot of people in that regard. They've been trying to make the WNBA thing for a long time. I don't think it's a profitable business. It's just something I see as bizarre and unnatural. So I'm rooting for her to retire.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
I'm told, and so Sam says she should go play in Europe. She has no desire to go to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
She's from Iowa. She's got a boyfriend, right? Like she would fucking just get lost in Europe. And I think she should go back for a fifth season, make a bunch of NIL money because she's eligible. And then that's it. Who says you have to fucking go do the next thing?
Yes.
Like who says?
Right.
And if she plays her cards right, she'll make $20 million next year. She'll make more money next year than if she played in the WNBA for the next 15 years.
If those numbers are those numbers, then it's almost a no-brainer that she should go back to college, play one more year, have the time of your life. And it would be a gangster move too to say, oh no, I'm good. I don't need to go pro.
Right.
That would be awesome. So I'm definitely rooting for her in that regard. There's got to be a lot of people in her ear, a lot of agents in her ear, or, just agents of self-interest from all different angles, because she is a household name at this point. I'll say this, dude, men or women, she was the star of the tournament, I think, by far.
Absolutely.
It's like there's Caitlyn Clark, there's Angel Reese, and then there was some fat guy who played for like NC State or something, or Maryland or something.
So you have Zach Edey, who's the giant.
Yeah.
For Purdue. I think if what's his name, Jamal Sheed had not gotten hurt for Houston, Houston probably would have been in the Final Four, and they were a really good team. But there's nobody in the men's side who's even close to Caitlyn Clark in terms of brand. Right. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting about her chart, she's born on January 22nd, right? So she has all these master numbers. She's born in 2002, so that's a 22, right? She's born on the 22nd, so that's a 22. So she's got all these master numbers in her chart. I don't know when she was born, so I just kind of rectified her chart a little bit to, give her some astrological credence. But one of the things what really grabbed me is that she is 2 degrees Aquarius. And so that means Pluto has been on her sun, right? And whenever you get a Sun-Pluto conjunction in a chart, and especially with somebody like Caitlyn Clark, Pluto can be really polarizing. So she's never said anything that's polarizing. She's never really done anything that's polarizing. And yet she has become this polarizing figure in women's sports in a lot of ways. So you get that with Pluto. Like, I'm not sure she'll ever be as big as she is now with Pluto conjuncting her sun. I mean, this is, she's got a bunch of Aquarius in her chart. And if somebody's just going to go their own way, it's going to be an Aquarian, right? I mean, she'll just say, fuck it, I'll do what I want to do because that's what Aquarius does. But she started to get a lot of hate, right? Like there was Lisa Leslie, who was on Gil Arenas' show, and she was talking shit about Caitlyn Clark and how she got all these points, and she'd been there longer than anybody else. I mean, she basically got all of her facts wrong about Caitlyn Clark, all of them, and she had to come back on the show and apologize and set the record straight because she was really misinformed. And then you had Dawn Staley barking at her, and Dawn Staley saying, "Oh, well, you can't be the GOAT until you win the big game." Right. And there's this sense that there are this kind of entrenched group inside of women's basketball who is either black radical, not black conservative, but kind of black progressive liberal lesbian, right? They don't like her.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like her. And they don't like her because she does not conform to the WNBA model. And, there are stories that have come out in the WNBA where women in the locker rooms are, kind of objectified and harassed. Not everybody in the WNBA is lesbian. And yet it's a very, lesbian heavy league, and a lot of players are kind of, they're kind of pushed off to the side a little bit, right? They're almost like second-class citizens. I mean, this is what the WNBA has come to stand for. So it's kind of this mindset, right, of women's basketball, which has been commandeered by sort of the hardcore, for lack of a better term, lesbian left. And so that's why when we talked during the last show, we talked about LSU, right, and Kim Mulkey, and sort of the hit piece that was done on her and the LSU team. And it's because Kim Mulkey is, theoretically white, straight, dresses she wants a man to look at her. She does not fit the mold. She does not fit the political mold. And they're trying to force this narrative onto Caitlyn Clark. And there's a lot of jealousy, number one, because she's just so good. And number two, she's, she doesn't really fit the mold. She's got a boyfriend. She's from Iowa. I don't think she has any tats, right? So that's where you get this Pluto conjunction with the sun in Aquarius. But she's revolutionizing women's basketball and women's sports. And I just think from this standpoint, it's fascinating. Those games with Caitlyn Clark outdrew the men's games in the NC2A. And those games with Caitlyn Clark were the last game that was as popular as the LSU Iowa game was the Golden State Warriors versus the Boston Celtics. I think it might have been the final game in that series against the Celtics. That was the last game that was more popular than that game. So again, if you just look at her chart with all this Aquarius, she's kind of revolutionizing sports and women's basketball, and even in a weird way, this idea that women's basketball has to be woke. And she's not rowing her boat. She's not rowing her paddle in that boat. And then she has Mars in Aries, which just makes her just a killer competitor. She's just a killer competitor with Mars and Aries. And she's got that sextile to Saturn. So she's disciplined and dedicated. She's just got all kinds of crazy ability with these sextiles with her Sun and Mercury and Neptune. We'll see some of this in Cooper Flagg's chart as well. It's a bit different, but when you see Mars, which is so prominent, and sextiling all of her personal planets, and then sextiling Saturn, and even the Jupiter square isn't that bad, right? It's like her Mars is fucking kick ass, So she does need a challenge. Mars in Aries needs a challenge. I don't think the WNBA is her challenge. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to her. And like you, I hope she goes back one more year and just taps out.
So let's say Caitlyn, has $20 million in the bank. It's going to be a tough sell to say, hey, come hang out with us bullies who are going to sexually harass you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's a very tough sell. At that point, if she's financially set for life, I can't see the WNBA being an appealing option, because the only way you'd get her to do it is if you could, promise if some sort of endorsement deal was involved as well. And maybe with the chart reading, it doesn't to me look like she's a sellout. Somewhere in this Aquarian Mars energy is somebody who isn't a sellout. Am I right about that?
She's a warrior. She's a warrior.
So.
And even with her, which is really grounded and traditional, and squaring up against all those Aquarian planets.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to tell her what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are fixed signs that we're dealing with here. And I don't know. I feel like if she went to the WNBA, she'd be the object of a lot of petty hate. What do you think?
Absolutely. Not just that, but I think bullying and harassment and hazing. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you're a veteran, Brittany Griner, just ignorant thug, right? You're going to take that opportunity to take this normal girl who's a lot more talented to you. You're going to take your thug mentality out on her, and she's not going to be the only one, and she'll be outnumbered, and it's going to be a bunch of thugs and some nice girl, and the nice girl shouldn't hang out with them, period. In terms of the whole mean girl mentality, she's better. She doesn't need to hang out with the Brittany Grinders of the world.
I agree. I totally agree with you. I think we have another Olympics coming up here, so more likely she'll play on an Olympic team.
Okay.
And she'll get that credit. If you're Adam Silver, because the WNBA is compensated by the NBA. If the NBA didn't pay the WNBA's bills, the WNBA go out of business. But if you're Adam Silver, you're looking at her and you're saying to yourself, how do we get this girl into our league? Right? Because theoretically, she could make the WNBA more watchable. So if you're Adam Silver, you're asking yourself, how do we get her into this league? And the only thing that I could come up with would be you give her an ownership stake.
Wow.
And how do you think the girls in the WNBA would feel about that? Oh, we built this. We were here long before you.
I think they would bitch, but eventually they would bend the knee. That's what I think.
Because that's ultimately like remember we were talking about how Caleb Williams came out and said, well, I want an ownership stake.
Right.
And he had no bag for that, right?
He doesn't have the leverage that Caitlyn has.
Doesn't have the leverage. Caitlyn Clark has the leverage.
Mm-hmm.
She could say, I want a piece of the action. If she wanted.
Then I could see it working. Because I think that would actually eradicate any bullying. I really do. Because I think that, let's say you're a WNBA bully. We know there's a few. I think that they would not bite the hand that theoretically feeds them. You know what I mean? Even if they are
clearly from a hierarchical standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that these people who are in sports generally follow hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
And if she is higher up in the hierarchy, like they have to respect her. Although I could be wrong here. Maybe it's different with women. Maybe women tend to be more petty than men. Men recognize like alpha status, right? I mean, they do. They may not always like it, but they recognize alpha status. I'm not sure if it's the same with women. I think she's in a tough spot. I think she's in a tough spot, and I think she's absolutely fascinating, and especially this Aquarian impact that she has. Right, she's revolutionizing women's basketball, and she is not somebody. She's not Angel Reese. She's not Juju Watkins. She's not Lisa Leslie. She's not Dawn Staley. She's this girl from Iowa, and it's I think it's amazing.
Yeah. So should we check in with Cooper Flagg?
Yes. So you were touting. You know what? I've hit my freeze moment.
Yeah.
All right. So all right. So entertain the troops for tell people about Cooper Flagg, and I'll be right back.
All right. So Cooper Flagg is currently a senior in high school. He just played at the McDonald's All-American game. He is a 6'9" forward from Maine. Yes, you heard that right. He's from Maine. He's from New England. They call him the main event. I got to say, I think he is the most hyped prospect since LeBron James. And the reason why I say that is because I started hearing about Cooper Flagg when he was just a junior, just like I heard about LeBron James when he was a sophomore/junior. People are saying that he could potentially be the next Kevin Garnett, that he's a little bit more skilled. He's playing at Duke next year, and he's going to be a one and done. He's going to play 1 year at Duke, and he's going to go to the NBA, 90% chance. But we're going to take a look at his chart, and I think Cooper Flagg he's going to be definitely an NBA superstar. And I think he's going to whoop ass at Duke next year. He's the number one overall pick, the number one overall recruit in the class of 2024. So
this guy's got a really interesting chart.
Should we pull up a picture so people know what he looks like, sort of?
Sure. Why don't we do that? It's a good idea. Now, I had heard about him briefly before you brought him up. And you were like, this guy's going to be incredible. So here's Cooper Flagg. Do some images. And how tall is he right now? Is he 6'9"?
Yeah, I want to say 6'9".
So he could still grow. Right?
6'9",
he could still grow.
He's only 17. So he was born December 21st, 2006. Right now he's only 17. So he's almost definitely going to grow.
He'll probably grow another 2 inches. So he'll come out at around 6'11".
Yeah.
So does he have a brother named Ace? He has a brother. Did you know that?
I had no idea. Basketball stars Cooper Ace Flagg said. I did not know that. So
there are two flags. Two flags are flying in the Cooper family, or two flags are flying in the Flagg family. Ace is his brother. I don't know and they're from Maine, which is really weird because Maine is not like a basketball hotbed.
Yeah, typically not.
Yeah. All right, so let's check out his chart here. So again, another really super interesting chart. He's born he's 29 degrees Sagittarius. And remember how we talked about how Caitlyn Clark has Pluto, transiting Pluto conjunct her sun? He's got Pluto conjunct his sun in his chart. So this guy he's a force. He's a force to be reckoned with. And he has Mercury and Mars and Jupiter, and they're all in Sagittarius. So he's got a Mars-Jupiter conjunction. Of course, Mars is athletic ability, right? Jupiter is opportunity, expansion. Mercury is timing, reflexes. Like, this guy is a super fucking Sagittarius. This is a super stellium. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in Sagittarius. Pluto conjunct with the galactic center. And then trine Saturn in Aries. The only thing I'm concerned with about his chart is injury. Because he has Uranus in Pisces squaring Mars. And, Sagittarius rules the knees, right? It rules the knees and and part of the thighs, right? You get down to the shins and you're kind of in Capricorn territory. So the only thing that would concern me about his chart would be an injury, sudden injury, and drastic, by the way. That's the one thing. Other than that, this guy's a beast. And he's got Venus and Moon and Capricorn. So, he's not real sentimental. Basketball is probably everything to him, I would think. And especially with that trine with Saturn. That's a powerful chart, man. So if he could somehow deal with whatever injury, because all players get injured at some point. It's just the matter of the severity of the injury and when it happens and where it happens. But if he can kind of work with that. The other thing, too, with Uranus is sometimes it could be really, really sudden. And it would not be uncommon for somebody to just say, all of a sudden, I'm done. And I don't want to do this anymore. Right? Although with that trine with Saturn, I don't really see that. I see this as being more of an injury risk. That's my take with this chart. But this guy, he's wired. He's wired for greatness with all this Sagittarius. Of course, Larry Bird was a Sagittarius as well, born in a different time of the month. But Sagittarius is a great athletic sign. All the fire signs are great athletically. And so there you go. There's your man, Cooper Flagg. What do you think?
I'm excited. I mean, he's somebody who could get me to watch a college basketball game next year. You know what I mean? Just from a curiosity standpoint to see how he's going to do. I think he's headed to the best possible program for him. And, we can expect to see him in the NCAA March Madness tournament next year for sure.
I wonder, because, a lot of the time they want to throw these pros out and play in the Olympics. I wonder if Cooper Flagg will play in the Olympics.
That would be a draw. I know that. I think it'd be cool.
Now, Steve Kerr, I think, is going to coach the team.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like playing young guys.
Okay.
But, man, it would be kind of cool if they could get him in the Olympics.
Yeah, it would be cool.
And then you could have kind of a parallel story with Caitlyn Clark and Cooper Flagg in the Olympics.
Is the Olympics this summer?
I think so, yeah.
Holy shit. I wonder who's on the USA roster.
I know who's not. I think all the big names are going to show out.
Really?
Yeah. Although Draymond Green is not on the team.
Yeah.
And he's been a fixture for the last 2 Olympics.
He hasn't changed his behavior at all, has he?
Draymond is one of the most complicated people I've ever run across in sports. I mean, and I've seen a lot of players. No, he hasn't changed his behavior. And he did this thing a couple of weeks ago where he got thrown out right at the beginning of the game, and they were playing Orlando. And I don't think he wanted to play against Paolo Banchero. That's my thought. I don't think he wanted to play against him. So he gets thrown out real early, and the Warriors come back and they win the game. Steph is like super pissed at him, kicks a chair, And you think that, okay, well, Draymond's at it again, and he's going to play his way right out into another suspension. He comes back in the next games and plays out of his fucking mind. Right? Like, you got to be kidding me. And so he sets up all this animus, and all the fans are just done. And they could see that Curry's exasperated, and he's done. And he comes back and he just whoops ass. And I'm like, that guy's complicated, dude. He's just complicated. And it would, it would be one thing if he just blew it out, melted down, and just, could just slide right off the map. Leaning back, and he's almost better than ever. He's a Pisces. Go figure.
Interesting. I gotta ask you an astrology question, because I've been asking other people, and it's like something that's always on my mind. Is you have the tropical astrology, right, which is what we're looking at right now, and the sidereal astrology. And I made the mistake. I was in this group chat. It was like from this podcast, and it's like a bunch of astrology people. And I asked them, where do they stand on that? And they're like, oh, not now. You know what I mean? Like, as if I like sparked a civil war. Because there's interesting arguments for both. Because I know you, Longo, and my buddy Dylan Sicosio, you guys are all on the tropical side. But then I know some other guys that are on the sidereal side. So it's like, and it's like a month difference with all the signs, it seems to me. Right?
Yeah. So I have gotten into it a little bit, and I have just a couple of litmus tests.
Yeah.
That I run by people who tend to be sidereal people versus Placidus tropical people.
Placidus, right?
Okay. So I asked the person, do you know who Mick Jagger is? Most people know who Mick Jagger is, right?
Right.
And they say yes. Okay. And I'll say, if you had to choose one sign between these two signs that Mick Jagger would be, what would it be? Would
Leo,
Mick Jagger be a Leo?
Yeah.
Or would Mick Jagger be a Cancer?
And they go Leo.
Most people would say Leo, right?
Yeah.
Like, he demonstrates all the qualities of being a Leo. He's the front man for the Rolling Stones. He's audacious. He's kind of egotistical, right? If you were to put his chart in sidereal, he'd be a Cancer, and it makes no fucking sense.
Mm-hmm.
No sense at all. Another one is Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury. What's his nickname?
The Traveler, I
The
believe.
Gypsy King.
Yeah.
Right? And he came into that fight against what's his name?
Wilder or something.
Wilder. Yeah. And he was on a throne and wearing a crown.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. He's
a Leo. If you put his chart into sidereal, he's a Cancer. I'm telling you, that's not how a Cancer rolls.
Right. And Deion Sanders would probably be another example.
Deion Sanders would be right at the edge of Leo Cancer. From a Placidus or mundane perspective, right? Just go to 9/11. Like, where was Saturn on 9/11? He was in Gemini. What happened on 9/11? You had the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing sidereal, Saturn's in Taurus. Just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And then 9/11, there was also a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, right? There's some super special thing on that.
Well, 9/11, the moon was in Gemini as well.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
So the other thing, too, is that Pluto was in Sagittarius. And so what happened during 9/11, theoretically, guys from some other country, which is Sagittarius, came in and destroyed Pluto, those buildings, which now set up a holy war with those guys from their country, right, and this country. Well, that doesn't really happen if Pluto's in Scorpio.
Mm-hmm.
So I am clearly a tropical Placidus guy, and
Yeah.
and there are more of these, um, uh, just examples that I have. Yeah.
That's interesting. And it's weird because the sidereal is also called Vedic, and it's also has this India connotation, right?
Right. Yeah.
And but their argument is like, they're actively, because a lot of them argue like, okay, we're actively using telescopes and stuff, and that's where they base a lot of what they're saying. Am I right about that?
I guess I don't know what they're
Yeah.
saying. I don't pay attention to what they're saying.
Okay.
Brandy has an interesting comment,
Yeah.
and she says sidereal is very dark to me.
Very dark. Okay.
Do you agree with that? I mean, with your basic
It-
understanding, what do you think?
Well, here's the thing. Like, you pull up these charts, like, or for example, like Kobe Bryant being a 0-degree Virgo, that makes complete sense to me. And it's like, when we pull up these charts, it's like there's a very good case, for these people and their charts and their placements to be where they are. I guess a test for me would be, to see what's actually happening. Because I think part of astrology, for me personally, it's like I've never really seen a disconnection between astronomy and astrology. To me, they've always kind of been the same thing. So it's like, I guess the real litmus test is, seeing what is actually occurring in the sky. And I think that, whatever's happening in the sky is probably what is happening on Earth, essentially. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I think that there's some validity to that. I've got 3 planets in Libra, and if you were to put them into sidereal, they'd all be in Virgo. And I've
yeah,
been living with those 3 planets all my life, and I can tell you they're plenty Libra.
yeah, yeah,
That's just from the inside out, right?
yeah.
You
Because
know?
it's interesting. I see people get in these little debates, and I kind of hear out both sides. But I also feel like if we're in the Western Hemisphere, then the Western version of astrology would make more sense.
I
Because I
totally
know,
agree with that. I
yeah,
I totally agree. I find Vedic to be extremely fatalistic,
right,
and it comes out of a tradition that's based on a caste system,
right.
and I'm not down with it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we're gonna get to this next thing on Lindsey Harding,
Okay.
but before we go there, I just got it. I did this deep dive on Frank Sinatra this last weekend,
Okay.
and I am convinced that Frank Sinatra was the most dangerous and evil man of the 20th century.
That's epic.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that epic, but it makes perfect sense because he's hidden in plain sight. It's
Dude,
like,
when you get into Frank Sinatra's story
yeah,
and the layers of culture that he touched all the way to JFK, he's fucking evil.
wow.
Evil.
So what'd you uncover in this deep dive?
Oh, dude, where do you want me to begin? First of all, Frank Sinatra he's like the first rock star. The only so prior to Frank Sinatra, there was Bing Crosby, and Bing Crosby they had big bands, right? And the big band was kind of a new thing. Prior to big bands, they had orchestras, but the big band was where they had band leaders, and there were usually men, but not always, sometimes women, would be the singer of the big band. And so Bing Crosby was the first guy that came out, and he would sing with like Harry James and Tommy Dorsey and all these people. And that's where Frank Sinatra comes in, and he wants to be bigger than Bing Crosby. And so he moves into that world as becoming a big band singer. And the first kind of mania that ever existed was called Sinatra Mania. And there was all these teenage girls, and they were Bobby Soxers, and they lost their minds over Frank Sinatra. He was like the first Elvis. And his whole story is interesting because he becomes really popular during World War II. And the reason he's popular is because he's not in the war. Like all these other guys are at war and they're fighting the war. But Frank Sinatra had a forceps birth. And during his forceps birth, one of his eardrums was punctured, right? And so he was able to somehow get a 4F based on his ear. But there are some people who contend that the mafia paid $40,000 for Frank Sinatra to get a 4F. So he's kind of this guy that becomes incredibly popular while all the men are at war, you know. And in a lot of ways, it sort of mirrors this tradition back in the medieval period, right? There was this tradition called the chanson de geste, which was the romantic poets that was sort of left behind with the maidens of the castle while all the men went off to the Crusades, right? So the chanson de geste would write poems and sing love ballads, and so the first rock stars really comes out of that tradition. So he's kind of like that. So he has no competition, right? He has no competition whatsoever, and he becomes huge, really huge. Like he's selling millions and millions of records. And in the meantime, he's always got this mob connection going on in the background, right? It's always Frank and the mob. And sometimes it's more common than it is at other times. And right when he reaches like the peak of his stardom, he falls in love with Ava Gardner. And Ava Gardner is like really beautiful, right? And Harry Cohn, who was the head of the was it Warner's or wasn't Warner's? It might have been Columbia. And Harry Cohn said, "Look, you're married. Drop the Ava Gardner thing. Just drop it. You can't do it. It's going to be terrible for our business." And they were like two animals in heat. And they couldn't keep their hands off each other. So he wound up eventually sacrificing his marriage for Ava Gardner, and his career just went into like free fall, and he really bottomed out. And something happens like in that bottoming out period, and he comes back, and he does this movie called From Here to Eternity, which puts him back on the map as a star. And then at that point, like his goal is just to become this unstoppable force, which ultimately he becomes. He starts winning Oscars. He starts winning all of these, like, golden records, and he's back at the top of the charts. And he's hugely popular, massively popular. And then he starts his affiliation with the Rat Pack. And then the Rat Pack comes out of sort of this genesis of all these actors that would get together. People like Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, and David Niven, and Gary Cooper. And they were these stars who would party together, and they were also political. So Sinatra kind of gets into that world. He becomes friends with Bogey. Bogey dies. And then he winds up like banging Lauren Bacall, right? And takes up with her. But he becomes sort of the head of the Rat Pack. But he forms his own Rat Pack with Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. Peter Lawford is the missing key in all of this, because Peter Lawford was another one of these guys that was at home during the war, and he becomes this really famous star. His star was bigger than Frank Sinatra. He did a lot of fucking Lassie movies and shit like that. He was English. He played sort of this suave, debonair guy. He got a lot of fan mail. The Bobby Soxers loved him. And he and Sinatra were buddies. And Peter Lawford was like, I think he was bisexual. But there was a period where he was with Ava Gardner. And then Frank took Ava Gardner from him and created this huge rift between the two of them. So eventually, Peter Lawford's star power starts to wane, and he has to find somebody rich to marry. All these debutantes want to marry Peter Lawford because he's good looking. but he finds this one woman that he's going to marry. And ironically, there's this story of Peter Lawford when he's in Florida and he's working at a country club, and he befriended like the black guys that worked at the country club. And the guy who ran the country club saw him hanging out with these black guys and asked him what he was doing. And he said, I'm hanging out with my friends. And he threatened to fire him. And he said, I don't ever want you hanging out with those darkies again.
Huh.
And the guy who owned that country club was Joe Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's father, right? So who does Peter Lawford marry? He marries Joe Kennedy's daughter. So this whole thing is crazy, right? So he marries John F. Kennedy's sister. And old man Kennedy says to Peter Lawford, I need you to rebuild your bridge with Frank Sinatra because we need him to get my son elected president. He needs the mob ties. He needs the mob connection. So Peter Lawford eventually becomes friends again with Frank Sinatra. And it's through Frank Sinatra. And it's the first election where Hollywood stars play a huge role in backing a president, right? Like it was a big deal. All these Hollywood stars came out and backed John F. Kennedy. So it wasn't just Sinatra and Sammy Davis, people like Gary Cooper and all these people, right? So you could see already where Hollywood was entrenched with the Democrats because Kennedy was a Democrat. But it goes even deeper than that because there were two states that had to be won by Kennedy. One was in the primary, and it was, I believe, West Virginia. So Kennedy was up against Lyndon Johnson in the primary. And so Sinatra tapped on his mafia union guys to carry the primary in Virginia. So Johnson does not win Virginia, or Kennedy doesn't win Virginia without the intercession of Sinatra and the mafia and the unions. So that wraps up the Democratic nomination. So he becomes the Democratic nominee. And then they have to win Illinois to defeat Nixon. And they go back to Sinatra, who at this time goes to Sam Giancana and says, we need Chicago. And so again, they rig everything and they win Illinois, they win Chicago, and Kennedy beats Nixon by just over 100,000 votes. It's really close. So Frank Sinatra is instrumental in basically throwing the election for JFK.
That's so funny.
Right. So he plays this huge role because if it's not for Sinatra and Peter Lawford and Kennedy's sister, Lawford's wife, none of this happens. Right. So then Kennedy gets elected. And one of the deals that they made was that Bobby, who was a senator, he was going after the mob. He was going after Sam Giancana. And basically the mob said, look, we'll do all this, but you got to leave us alone.
Mm-hmm.
So what does Kennedy do? He makes his brother attorney general, and they do the same fucking thing, right? They're going after the mob, and they're going after Giancana. It's like they go back on their word. The other group that the Kennedys reached out to were the Jews and the Jewish mafia and the Israeli lobby. And they said, yeah, we'll help your son get elected, but he has to recognize Israel as a state. And once Kennedy was elected, he did not want to recognize Israel. Like he hated Moshe Dayan. He hated David Ben-Gurion. You know, he did not want them to, have their nuclear power plant. So he made enemies of the Israelis, right? But really the big enemies were the mob. And of course, Jack Ruby was a mobster, and he's in all this shit, right? And if Sinatra isn't involved, if he isn't through Sinatra and the mob getting Kennedy elected, there's a very good chance we have Nixon as president. And the 20th century is completely different. Completely different. So in that regard, and I don't think Sinatra was always like a Democrat, and his mother was one of these kind of union organizers. His mother was famous for like giving abortions, like on the side. That was one of the things his mother did. So Sinatra had that part of him, and then when you look at like the Rat Pack in Las Vegas, he becomes this icon of this hedonic culture, right? With gambling and booze and you know, beginning to wear away at kind of the moral fabric of society, right? Like he makes all this stuff really, really hip, but it's not good, right? It's not good for the country. And he there's some people he was really generous with. Other people he treated absolutely horribly. And he had this really, and I think Frank Sinatra had done, I think he did a deal with the devil. This is what I think. Because he had this really weird thing about staying up at night. Like he would force people to stay up night after night after night after night after night, right? And play like fucking board games and charades, or you know, fucking orgies or whatever he was doing, right? Like he could not go to bed. And I think he was haunted. I think he was haunted by something he had done. And I think it happens in that period where he is basically on the outs with Hollywood. And he makes this comeback with this movie From Here to Eternity, right? And there's even something about the name Eternity, like, you know, like your soul is damned for eternity, or I have you for all of eternity, right? There's like, it's a really weird thing. And then here's some other weird shit with Sinatra. There's this movie that he did. I think it's called Senseless. It's a really not very well-known Frank Sinatra film. And in the movie, he plays this deranged criminal who wants to kill the president of the United States. And they hijack this room in an apartment. And there's this woman and her kid. And it's him and two of his like mob guys. And he's got a rifle with a scope. And the whole movie is based on this premise that this character is going to assassinate the president. Right? Like, isn't that fucking weird? And then I think they're either filming Ocean's 11 or Sergeant's 3. I forget which one of the Rat Pack films it is. And they're filming a funeral scene, right? Like on the set, they're filming a funeral scene. And at that very same time, Kennedy is killed. Like, it's really this weird, like, you know, what do they call it? Entanglement, this weird quantum entanglement. And then Sinatra plays this character in The Manchurian Candidate, where he actually winds up stopping the guy that is supposed to kill a high-ranking politician who was about to run for president, right? So in that movie, he plays the redeemer of the guy who is going to kill this high-ranking official. And even The Manchurian Candidate is really weird, because the guy who plays the assassin in The Manchurian Candidate is this guy named Lawrence Harvey. And I always felt like there was this weird connection between the name Lawrence Harvey and Lee Harvey Oswald, right? And there's a whole other side to Lawrence Harvey that's also really strange. So you add all this stuff up with Sinatra, like the entanglement with Kennedy and this weird high strange with presidential assassinations and murders and dude, I think he's probably the most evil man of the 20th century. That's what I think. Mm-hmm. I came away from watching a 3.5 hour thing on the Rat Pack and then going down the Sinatra rabbit hole. I'm like, this motherfucker was evil. He was evil. He ruined he ruined the moral fabric in a lot of ways of society with the boozy Rat Pack. And then he sets up a corrupt election and basically undermines the entire electoral process where Nixon could have won and we wouldn't have had a bunch of the shit that happened, I think, as a result of that.
Right.
So
Yeah. Kennedy brought in, what was it, the Hart-Celler Act, where it's basically they opened up immigration to the entire world for the most part.
What's that?
The Hart-Celler Act, I think, of 1963.
Yeah, but I think it's really Johnson that
Okay.
seals the deal with that.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
Sammy Davis Jr., he was openly a Satanist, as I recall, right?
Sammy Davis Jr. was a Satanist, and he
Yeah.
and Frank Sinatra are both Sagittarians.
Huh.
So they're born like I think Sinatra's the 12th and Sammy Davis is the 8th.
Yeah.
So they had that sun conjunction. Sammy was fucking evil too, man.
Mm-hmm.
Sammy was evil too. He was not a good dude. Sammy Davis was not a good dude. I knew this guy who was friends with Linda Lovelace. You know Linda Lovelace? Linda Lovelace
Sounds really familiar, but I don't know who
She
that
was
is.
a porn star. She did this movie called Deep Throat.
Okay.
And this guy he lived with Linda Lovelace in an apartment in Paris. And they were lovers or anything. But she had this manager named Chuck Traynor,
Yeah.
who was her handler. So Chuck Traynor would men would pay to be with Linda Lovelace.
Okay.
And Sammy Davis is one of those guys. And he spent a week with her in this apartment in Paris. And he wasn't a good dude. Dean Martin was kind of interesting. Like Dean Martin was in some ways the opposite of Frank Sinatra.
Mm-hmm.
And astrologically, Dean Martin is a Gemini, so he is the opposite of Frank Sinatra. And Dean Martin was involved, a total Gemini thing with Martin and Lewis, right, with Jerry Lewis. And anyway, I came away with thinking that, and we love Frank Sinatra's standards, and there's that whole kind of hipster culture, but America would have been a better place if Frank Sinatra had gone to war instead of fucking being the first rock star.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what you're laying down here. I think that not only him, but the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, I think we could do without all of them. You know what I mean? They kind of represent the beginning to the end, in my opinion. I think that the 1960s sort of turned the world upside down. I mean, this is what you're talking about is prior to the 1960s, but I feel like we're still recovering from the 1960s in a lot of ways.
Well, the 60s, I did that show a couple of weeks ago where I looked at Jack Parsons and Ron Hubbard and the Babylon Working. And I think that's part of the spell of the 60s for sure. And, a lot of the entrenched power from the 1960s is still in power.
Mm-hmm.
You have people like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, and a lot of these people that went through those revolutionary times, they're still in power. And they were the ones who eventually took those kind of, Herbert Marcusean ideas and mainstream them and corporatize them. And, much to, I think, the, sort of the failure of this country, right? And that's when the social Marxists came to power. It was under Clinton. Yep.
Interesting. So do we got anything else in regards to sports?
I wanted to talk about Lindsey Harding a little bit.
Okay, let's go for it.
So Lindsey Harding
Yeah.
is this woman. Let me see if I get a picture of her up here. Who is being interviewed by the Charlotte Hornets for their head coaching position. And Lindsey Harding is right now a coach for the Stockton Kings, who are a G League team for the Sacramento Kings. And she has the potential of being the first female head coach in the NBA. So she's a Gemini. kind of fitting. And I had some thoughts about this, but I want to pass the ball to you here, Al. What do you think?
I just, I had no idea about this prior to you sending it to me, and I'm just like, come on, it's like this forced agenda is inescapable. And, I thought to myself, it's like, this is DEI. This is, this is what it is. NBA players they have very big egos, very high testosterone, and they know the sport of basketball. This is a purely ceremonial position this woman will probably hold. They're probably going to hire her. And it's just agenda. It's just agenda. And I just roll my eyes at the whole situation.
So I think it's interesting that the team is the Hornets, right? Yeah. And when you have a nest, right, you have to have a queen bee.
Huh.
And I think that's the symbolism here, is that the Hornets would have their queen bee, and it's really a very fascinating symbol in a lot of ways, right? That the queen bee is the matriarchal kind of tabula rasa, right, of the entire hive and the collective. So it kind of makes sense that they would hire a woman. But I have a thought here about this. I think that there is a particular coach right now who's a woman who's looking at this and saying, I want that job. Do you know who that coach is?
Pat Summitt.
Dawn Staley.
Okay.
I think Dawn Staley wants this job.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, Dawn Staley's in South Carolina.
Yeah. Oh, that chick. Oh, okay.
Right?
Yep.
She is hyper competitive. She's just won her second straight NC2A title, undefeated season. I think Dawn Staley's looking around and she's looking at the NBA. That's what I think.
Interesting.
And I would not be surprised if Dawn Staley gets wind of this and reaches out to the Hornets and says, I'm interested. Now, if you're the Hornets, what do?
What's crazy? A crazy thought I have. If, a lot of players are black and they tend to be matriarchal, right?
Yep.
Could this potentially work? Like, my first gut instinct was, okay, this is agenda, blah, blah, blah. But could it be a situation where maybe these guys, a lot of them have a tendency towards matriarchy?
I would say absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. That's
100%.
crazy.
Until one of them loses their minds and has a bunch of, jammed up mother issues and hits her in the face one day on court. And then all of a sudden it'll be a different discussion. But
yeah,
I could totally see them falling in line with their matriarchal leader for sure. That's why this whole idea of the queen bee in the Hornet's nest kind of makes like weird symbolic sense. Yeah. I think Dawn Staley, this has got her attention. And if you're the Hornets, like Lindsey Harding, nice hire, right? Looks good on paper. First women's basketball coach. It's a first for a franchise that has no identity. But Dawn Staley, now that's a whole other level, right? Whole other level of public relations and marketing, right? Now you're coming in, somebody's won 2 back-to-back NC2A championships. She's coming in with crowns. And Dawn Staley is a huge personality, huge. And I don't know if you've seen any of her post-game talks. Have you seen any of her post-game talks from
I did see that one particular clip where somebody asked her if a biological man was, competing within women's basketball. Is that something you would support? And she gave the absurd and ludicrous, but politically correct answer. And she said yes. And she didn't want to. And she clearly doesn't agree.
He was having a hard time answering that question.
Yeah, because, every instinct and common sense part of her knew the correct answer, but she knew that a game was being played and she didn't want to distract the team. So she gave the establishment answer, which is absurd. It's backwards and it's flipped upside down.
Right.
But she played ball for sure.
That's right. That's right. As Jason Whitlock would say, she played nice with the Alphabet Mafia.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
She did. Yeah.
So I was watching some of her post-game stuff. She kept talking about God. Like God this, God that, God this, God that, God.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, this is a person who is using language in a way to vault and promote her into a higher public position or higher public space. Right? That's what I came away with. Like she's positioning herself in a lot of ways. And everybody knows she's girl on girl. Okay. And she's had like some very unusual relationships with women on the South Carolina women's team. Like that's come out. Or the other team that she coached at before. What was it? I forget. Anyway, so she's got kind of a bit of a checkered moral past. And now she's rolling out the God talk in a really big way. So I think that if they're going to entertain Lindsey Harding, that somebody from Dawn Staley's camp is going to get to the Hornets ownership and say, talk to her.
Yeah, man, that angle makes total sense. Because I just Googled a picture of her, and when she was a player, she was jacked. Okay, she was built. She was built like an NBA prospect, just shorter and with longer hair. But yeah, that's crazy, man. What a crazy world we live in with these angles. People are just constantly angling, just like they do on the court. They angle for positions and careers, and I can see her doing that based on what you're talking about here. And I do see the NBA going in that direction. We see it with the NFL. They have a running backs coach that's a woman. We see a concerted effort to put women in the camera, whether it be on the sidelines or reffing or coaching.
Yep.
And it's not meritocracy. It's a lot of it is agenda, and it's rather tiresome. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's tough. It's becoming a very tough culture to deal with at a certain level,
Well, it's I think the most challenging part is it's so predictable. It's so predictable and it's so mundane, right? I don't know. I think that humans thrive on novelty and thrive on experimentation and testing out new things, right? But not anything that's formulaic. And it just feels so formulaic and predictable and just really uninteresting. No matter how groundbreaking or new or trend-setting or avant-garde or whatever, it just feels really bored and played out.
Yeah. It's not bored and played out. Sirius Sports, the only place that mixes astrology and sports.
You're not going to find anything else out there like this, man.
Yeah, exactly. So I think.
Can you see Shirley's comment, by the way, on the?
Shirley, you can pray publicly and praise God in public if you're non-Caucasian, but not if you're white. I don't agree with that, Shirley. I think you can go out and praise God if you're white. Ain't no MF woman gonna bench my ass. Not my fault. She wouldn't get out of my face. Yeah, I mean, hey man, if these players get pissed, what was it? Latrell Sprewell choked his coach.
I was living in the Bay Area when that happened.
Yeah, it's like, dude, what's weird? It's like somebody like Phil Jackson. He commands respect. He's 6'11", and he knows his shit, and he's got some sort of philosophical mastery about him. You're not gonna fucking disrespect a guy that's 6'11" and has been in the league and knows his shit and won his championships, okay? Versus somebody like Steve Van Gundy or Stan Van Gundy. I feel like he was just sort of disregarded. It's a similar situation with one of these potential woman hires. If you start bitching, a grown man that's 6'8" and a multimillionaire is not going to fucking listen to a word. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, if she starts bitching, he ignores.
What kind of trauma zone?
Yeah.
Like she hits the guy in, right?
Yeah.
Like if the guy's got some kind of trauma zone with his mother, and look, I managed an apartment building in Oakland.
Yeah.
For 4 years. So I saw a lot of shit, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I saw was that the mother had to be the mother and the father simultaneously. And you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? You cannot do that. So there would be kind of the lovey-lovey and, my little sweetie, whatever. And then there'd be the holy hell ass whoopings, right? That would be the overcompensation for the father not being there. And it's just, it would be like this weird, you could just see that it would evolve to this weird love-hate relationship for women moving forward in their life, right? They couldn't segment out those roles where the father is in charge of discipline and the mother is in charge of nurturing. That person had to be one, and it confused the fuck out of these guys. I can tell you that right now. And then you had like the sisters kind of hovering around. They're taking notes, right? They're like, oh, this is how you do it. Okay. Right. I watched this whole thing play out, and it was a tragedy.
Yeah.
Absolute tragedy. And the only kids that did reasonably well were the ones that had some kind of a male figure in their life. The ones that didn't do so well. So, yeah, it just depends on the trauma zone they get caught up in. If they catch them on the wrong trauma zone or the wrong day, look out. This is exactly what Tom Dahmer wrote. You could have somebody lose their shit. And, but they're forcing these social experiments on us. Doesn't it feel that way?
Well, it's unnatural. Yeah. It's just, here's what I see. I see sort of these leagues trying to set an example, try to set like a social programming example. And I think there's a lot of power and participation. And so a lot of the leagues I'm not personally participating in, other than checking out the YouTube highlights occasionally. You know what I'm saying? So if I don't like what's going down in terms of like, the advertisements, the agenda that bleeds its way into sports, then I don't participate. That's typically my outlook on it.
Yep. Well, Al, it's been a great show.
Yep, definitely.
And we covered a lot of ground, a lot of territory. And unfortunately, we're not going to see you for a while.
Yes.
Because you're going to be in the bunker, basically converting the charter into an audiobook, right?
Yeah, I am. It takes a lot of time. I have the whole thing recorded, but the editing takes forever. I'm on like chapter 11 or 12 right now. And it's very time consuming. So I'm fully locked in on that, getting this audiobook down and just where it needs to be to, amplify the war against hip hop hypnosis. So I'm fully locked in.
Okay. So maybe we'll see you sometime later in the summer or the fall. And in the meantime, I'm not sure what we'll do with Sirius Sports. Maybe somebody will come off the bench. But I am going to be doing Astro Dads once a month. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I heard a rumor, and I'm glad it's being confirmed true right now. Astro, because like Longo mentioned it, and I'm like, are you sure he wasn't kidding? He's actually going to do it? That's awesome.
Well, you guys inspired me.
Yeah.
Right. You got Astro Chats, but we need some Astro Dads. So it's me and my buddy Ferris from California.
I
who
think
has
that has so much utility, man, because astrology is something that can help parents like big time. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
So it's like,
Totally.
and like if I'm a parent and I'd be interested in watching that show because it's going to
Yeah.
help you sort of anticipate things that are going to happen that are, or how to raise a Gemini, how to, what to expect from a Sagittarius. These are
Right.
really, so there's a lot there. There's a lot of huge potential there with Astro Dads.
Yeah. So I think our first one is going to be the first weekend in May. So we'll do a pre-record and we'll push it live on like a Saturday morning. It won't be a live stream,
Yeah.
but we'll push it live on Saturday morning. And we're going to do one per month, like you guys do over on Astro Chats.
Nice.
And, so yeah, and who knows? Maybe we'll call somebody off the bench and do some serious sports. Al, I know we'll meet back here again, but I really want to thank you for your participation and all you've done and brought to the table, and your humor and your insight. It's been great, and we'll get you back here in the fall.
All right, guys. Yeah, it's been awesome. Appreciate you, and I'll talk to you soon. All right.
All right, the great ALDawg. If you want to find out more about Al's work, there is a link in the show notes for him. In the meantime, we'll see you back here tomorrow for the Astro Weather. Bye for now.
See you guys.